on my first step ever. We have crossed a milestone. We will be crossing this milestone together. This is the 150th episode for my first step ever. And when I started this podcast, my only aim was to help the youngsters out there to listen to that small voice inside their head, that meek voice inside their heart, but have full conviction to keep going and doing what you like. And I couldn't be more happier that on this 150th episode of my first step ever, today on this journey, I have come across someone so extremely determined. He has that human spirit, that quality that all of us are always seeking out, that conviction, that belief, that energy, that enthusiasm that we are all seeking out within us. And the epitome of that, I have found someone a couple of weeks ago. I went to the open day of the South Australia, and I went to the Parliament open day. And the moment I entered the library, I heard a very faint but a very firm voice coming from one of the corners. And I was drawn to that particular corner. And there I saw a really amazing and a very enthusiastic man standing firmly and narrating some very interesting story to an audience. Little did I know that this amazing man who is all dressed up, he's shown up with a big smile and enthusiasm. And the way he was narrating his story, I thought that maybe it is this 110th time saying the same story because he was so good at it. And slowly, someone beside me just told me that he is the oldest Morse coder of Australia and maybe, in fact, for the world. So, if you're not aware of what a Morse code is, we are going to cover that very soon. But what I wanted to show that I actually got to know that this human being is 98-year-old young spirited man with that firm voice that he was explaining his story. He was looking right into the eyes of the audience. And then I got to know that only 2 years ago he lost his sight, and he was also getting hard of hearing. But for a minute I couldn't even say that, because of his spirit of actually gauging where the audience might be and using his body language, and more than that, the passion for sharing what he really believes in and what he's been really working for, is how he learned all about the Morse code in the World War II times. That is correct. So, my friends, let me welcome Laurence Wallace all the way from South Australia, the land down under. Welcome, Laurence. Thank you so much for being on my first step ever.
Thank you, Shani. My greetings to all of your viewers.
Now, because we have Laurie with us, I'm going to ask in some really interesting questions, because I really want to get deep inside the mindset of a person who is such a strong mind. He has such a that spirit that he is a strong-willed person, and he has the passion till date to do what he really believes in. But before that, let me give you a quick sneak peek of what Laurie has been doing so far, and then we are going to jump into his amazing story. So, I would like to say that this is the podcast where we delve into the lives of extraordinary individuals. And today, we spotlight Laurence Wallace, a 98-year-old pioneer honored with the Order of Australia Medal for his exceptional community service. Despite losing his vision 2 years ago and being hard of hearing in age 98, Laurie stands tall with charisma, enthusiasm, and elegance, ready to share his story and passion for Morse code. So thank you so much, Laurie, for doing that. Now, born in the Broken Hills in 1926, Laurie's career began at 14, delivering telegrams and mastering Morse code by 15. His dedication to preserving the history of the Overland Telegraph led to the formation of Morse Codians Fraternity of South Australia and Northern Territory. This group celebrates 1800s communication marvel, demonstrating Morse code across Australia and maintaining the legacy of the Adelaide-Darwin telegraph line. Laurie's recent work with the South Australian Parliament Research Library to create a working model of the Overland Telegraph line showcases his ongoing passion for history. Join us as we explore the inspiring journey of Laurence Wallace, a man whose life resonates with the timeless echoes of dots and dashes. That's right. So, Laurie, we are going to start from here on, and I want us to trace back to your childhood a few steps. And I like to know. So, here is my first question to you, Laurie. Who were the people who influenced you when you were growing up? And what are a couple of key things you learned during that time?
Starting my mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunt, who was a school teacher, and my teachers were my inspiration when growing up.
That's really exciting to know, Laurie. So, when you were growing up, as you mentioned that they were your inspiration and they helped you, could you tell us what was the quality of them, or maybe what you saw in them while growing up that planted that seed, that inspiration, that spirit that you have today?
I think the important thing is that when I was growing up, Australia, the world, was in a Great Depression of the 1930s, and my father was a public servant and he had a career in the public service for years, but there were less fortunate people than us. Some of our neighbours were unemployed in that Great Depression. Their children, my friends, they had no shoes. They had some comfort and confidence that were more fortunate than them. And my mother ensured that when we grew out of our clothes, that they were passed on to our unfortunate neighbours whose fathers were unemployed. Some of the children had no shoes, and we passed on our shoes as we grew out of them, and our clothing. And that was something that I learned then, that you must care and share with for those who are less fortunate than yourself.
That's really amazing, Laurie, because I really believe in that, you lead by example. And it's really great to see that you saw that your parents, what they did. And also, what's important is that beyond observing, you also made it a point that you act on it. Even that is a very, very important quality of a leader and of someone who is also wanting to giving back to the society. So, as we see over here, while you were growing up, you saw, that spirit of community and giving back and helping and growing together. And that is something that you weaved in you. I also believe that there was something more that you learned with your mother and grandmother. Is there something that you would like to share with us, or maybe an anecdote that really made a mark on your heart and on your mind?
I think the most important thing that I learned from my parents, my grandma and aunt, was that you must believe in yourself, that you must ensure that you are well educated, for you have a lifetime ahead of you, and you must decide which path you wish to follow.
This is very essential learning and an observation and a takeaway, Laurie. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, because this is exactly what we are wanting our audience to, understand, that believing in oneself is so important. And you're right that you were able to take that away from the way you've seen your mother, your grandmother, and your parents, lead by example. But while you were yourself a teenager back then, And I believe that our mind is very different, it's very fragile at that point in time. And now that I'm taking you way back in your life at the very beginning, I would really love to know, what were you as a young boy in your early teens, let's say just before joining the Telegraph? What kind of a person were you, and what really excited you back then?
My mindset was to continue my studies at school because I realised that I wanted to have a career through life. Having completed my studies at 14 years of age, there was an examination for the public service for the Postmaster General's Department, a junior officer in the Postmaster General's Department. I sat for an examination with some hundreds of other applicants, and I was fortunate to be appointed to the Postmaster General's Department, to the post office at Broken Hill. On my induction, the postmaster took me to the various sections: the postal section, the mail section, telephone exchange, the technical section, and finally we walked into the telegraph office. And there before me were telegraphists seated along each side of a long table, each with a sounder and a Morse signalling key. And I could hear the short and long signals. The telegraphist was sitting at a typewriter and he was typing a telegram, transcribing it from those short and long signals to plain language, the words written by person who wanted to send a speedy communication across Australia, perhaps from Broken Hill to Sydney or Broken Hill to Cairns in Queensland. And I was fascinated by that telegraph and to understand how they could convert these short and long signals, the clicking of the sounders, into the English language. That's where I wanted to go. That's was what I thought could be my future in the short term.
Laurence, this is such an exciting story, and I believe your journey. Because when you're saying that in your early teens, you were so focused that you wanted to study and, probably utilize your education and do more. And when you got the chance to actually go through the telegraph office and see what was happening back then, and it is very new for all our audiences, younger audiences, to understand what Morse code is all about, what is the sounder all about. And I'm very sure we're going to learn a little more about that through you going forward in the episode. But firstly, I like to say this is such an exciting start to your own career, because seldom in our times, we are ever going and experimenting what we really like to do. And you went out there, you saw something, there were different departments that you were taking through, and you had that calling, wow, this is something I really want to do. So my next question to you, Laurie, is when you started working, what was it that drew you towards the telegraph area, and how long did it take to learn the Morse code?
Well, I've answered the first part at my induction, that's what I wanted to do. And then I learnt Morse code 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, in my own time, with the postmaster teaching me and signalling telegrams, converting them from plain language to the Morse signals and signalling or listening to it when I was receiving the telegram, and it took me 6 months to reach a speed of 20 words per minute. I sat for an examination then, and we were at the start of World War II, and they required telegraphists urgently to handle the telegram from the general public, from the RAAF, the Army bases, and the Navy bases, the secret code messages. They required more telegraphists to handle some thousands of these that were passing through the Chief Telegraph Office, Sydney, each day. I applied for the telegraphist in training course and did a further 6 months training, technical side, the procedures, and increased my telegraph operating speed from 20 to 30 words per minute. And then
Wow.
I was, and then having qualified as a telegraphist, I worked in the Chief Telegraph Office, Sydney. Visualise the Chief Telegraph Office, Sydney at that time. They had telegraph lines radiating out to some 300 country cities and towns, and telegraph lines to Melbourne, telegraph line to Adelaide, telegraph line to Perth, telegraph lines to Brisbane. Nationwide, the speedy telegraph was the preferred method of communicating then, because in Australia at that time, just 10% of homes a telephone.
That's quite that's quite a journey that you have taken in your early 20s, I would say, Laurie, because I can see the passion that you had, and it's really exciting to know that you had that drive to go and trade yourself. You liked a skill, you were interested in something, and you wanted to always make sure that you are doing really well in that particular area to become an expert of a skill. So for everyone who's listening to us right now, whichever profession that you're in, or even if you are just about to start your own journey and you're wondering that how should I go forward, this is such a good takeaway from Laurie's journey and determination early on itself, that if you like something, if you're inclined towards something, go ahead and really, make your way in that particular profession or that skill. Get that skill right for yourself. Being the top 1% in any area or skill that you are working on, it really helps you go ahead in that particular profession, or take that particular skill, make it a transferable skill in any other profession as you go on with your life. So Laurie, that's really exciting to know how you got into the industry of do, decoding decoding the Morse code, and also learning the dots and the dash, how that really works, converting the Morse code into the English language to actually pass on the messages to different countries during World War. Now, the onset of World War. And it's really, for me, I'm very curious to know, what really happened around that time when you were operating during that very sensitive time around World War. It is scary, it's not easy. And I'm sure you have had your own stories, or situations or anecdotes that you would love to share with us. But before that, I'm going to take my audience through a really interesting story which has been shared by Laurie himself. So I'm going to show you, or you can hear the audio right away, right now, where Laurence is actually taking us through what really a Morse code is, what a sounder machine is, how that works, and how the entire line was laid out in Australia, and from Australia, how the codes were actually electrically transmitted to London. So, for all my listeners and all my viewers out there, just have a look at this particular section and you will get to know a lot more about Laurie. And this was an event where Laurie was actually sharing his knowledge, experience, and story at the Northern Territory event through an hologram. So it's an experience in itself for us to watch and hear. So please go and have a look over here.
Greetings. Welcome to the old telegraph station Alice Springs, at the very centre of Australia's first speedy communications link with the world. Today, we are in the midst of a 21st century communications explosion. You have your mobiles, iPhones, tablets, iPads, computers, the World Wide Web. The world is at your fingertips as you flash your messages, your signals across the world in kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes and terabytes. But how did they communicate in the 19th century? Put aside your 21st century gadgets. Come, take a step back in time with me. Let's roll back the clock to the 1800s. How did they overcome the tyranny of distance? Communications by line of sight, smoke signals, message sticks, lamps, and over distance, letters by runners, horseback, across the seas by sailing ship or steamer. That all changed in the 1840s. Following earlier trials, Samuel Morse invented the electric telegraph. His invention overcame the tyranny of distance. Almost at the speed of light, pulses could be transmitted over a line connecting centres many miles apart. It had no intelligence. What if there is a short and long signal? Still no intelligence. Samuel combined these short and long signals and made a code for each letter of the alphabet, each numeral, and the punctuation marks. Using the international code, derived from Morse's code, the letters will be 1 to 4 signals, the numerals 5 signals, and the punctuation marks 6 signals. The letters of the alphabet used most frequently in correspondence will be the shortest. To save signalling time, E, short, T, long, I, M. What about Z, X, Y, P, Q, L? Not used very often. They will be 4 signals. Z, too long and too short. X, and the numerals. 5 signals. 1 short and 4 long. 2 and 5 short. 6 to 0. Turn that around. 6. 1 long, 4 short. 7. 0. 5 was 0. Now, punctuation marks. Back then, good grammar was essential. Full stop. Comma. Question mark. The Morse code was born, paving the way for intelligence from short and long signals, dots and dashes being flashed over the wires across land and sea around the world. Whilst each signal was at the speed of light, take the word speedy. It has only 6 letters, but there are 16 short and long signals, slowing the transmission speed. It depends on just how fast I can transmit 16 signals by hand. It took me that long to signal speedy, at about 30 words a minute. Just a wee bit slower than the speed of light, don't you think? Remember, a telegraphist at the distant end, say Adelaide, would listen to the signals coming from the sounder. At first there was no sounder. A magnetic stylus imprinted dots and dashes on a paper tape, which was decoded by the telegraphist, slow, tedious, soon replaced by the sounder. To sum up, there are only two signals, short and long. A long signal equals 3 short signals. Each letter or character is a combination of from 1 to 6 signals. Therefore, when signalling, the right pausation is essential between signals, letters and words. Why? To make it intelligible for the receiving telegraphist at the distant end. I liken this to the composer, the musician who reads the music and plays a tune. Morse is much the same. Good signals with the right pausation is like music to the ears. You know, Morse signals have feelings. You can laugh in Morse. If someone signals a joke, if it is not funny, you would laugh like this. But if it was very humorous, how do we signal affection? A friendly kiss? A peck on the cheek? What about a kiss for a very special loved one far away? Okay, now back to Australia. By the 1860s, more than 150 years ago, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Hobart were connected by telegraph. But letters still took months by sailing ship or steamer across the seas to England, Europe or America. The breakthrough came in 1870. For commercial and financial benefits, Australia certainly needed a speedy telegraph link across the world. Undersea telegraph cables were already laid between countries and continents, and the cable from London had reached Singapore, with plans to extend it through Java, Indonesia, to Australia. The British Australia Telegraph Company, BAT, then wanted to bring the telegraph cable ashore at Port Darwin, Palmerston as it was known then. They wanted to then build a landline across the Gulf country to Queensland, to connect with the rich eastern colonies with more than 1 million population. But first, BAT had to seek the permission of the South Australian government to build the line through their colony to the Queensland border. Why was that? In 1870, there was no Northern Territory as we know it today. The small colony of South Australia, with a population of just 150,000, stretched from south to north, through the very centre of Australia, dividing east from west, and never the twain shall meet. Visualise it, lush tropical land to the north, desert through the centre, and rich pastoral lands to the south. That was South Australia. In January 1870, on receipt of a letter from the managing director of BAT Company, Commander Sherard Osborne, requesting permission to bring the cable ashore and build their line across to Queensland, the South Australian government sought the advice of Charles Todd, the colony's Superintendent of Telegraphs and Postmaster General. Todd was a visionary, and he would have said something like this: "Gentlemen, certainly not a line across to Queensland and those eastern colonies. May I recommend an alternative route? From south to north, Adelaide through the centre to Darwin and onward to London by undersea cable. I have already built the first section from Adelaide to Port Augusta. I can follow in the footsteps of the explorer John McDowell Stewart over much of the route he has already traversed. Give me the men and materials, and I will build the line and complete it in 18 months. It will cost £120,000. I know, that is more than half of the colony's annual budget. May I suggest a loan be raised to finance the project? For it will not only open up the pastoral lands and lush tropical north, there will be significant revenue from the cablegrams passing over the line from those other rich colonies and London. The cost will soon be recovered. The die was cast. Negotiations with BAT Company were completed by April 1870, and a bill to build the line was rushed through Parliament in June. Work commenced shortly thereafter. Across this harsh and unforgiving land through the very centre of Australia. Let us pause for a moment. What about the logistics of the project? Remember, this was 1870. Transport, bullock wagons, camels, horses, provisions, food for the men. The materials required. Some 36,000 poles, 36,000 porcelain insulators to string the number 8 gauge galvanised iron line on, providing a path for those telegraph signals in dots and dashes. It was like fencing wire. This is a piece of the original Overland Telegraph line. Back then, Australia had no manufacturing, so where did the materials come from? The porcelain insulators came from the Berlin pottery in Germany, and 10,000 galvanised iron poles to be used in the desert and white ant-infested areas were shipped from England. Local native trees were cut down and used over much of the route, more than 20,000 of them. Under harsh and trying conditions, the men dug the holes, planted the poles and strung the wire over about 2,000 miles. To complete our greatest engineering and technological feat of the 19th century, the Overland Telegraph, completed on the 22nd of August 1872. Australia's first speedy communications link with the world, from the gateway Adelaide, Alice Springs, Darwin, and onward to London by undersea cable. Letters taking months by sea to just hours by the electric telegraph. We should salute Charles Todd and the men who built Australia's communication icon, for in that era there were no telephones, no radios. They had not been invented. Speedy communication was only through the fingertips of the telegraphist. Back to the 21st century communications explosion. Your world, with your computers, internet, iPads, tablets and iPhones. You can bring them out now, for the world is at your fingertips. It is time for reflection. This is where it all started. On, off, binary 1, binary 0, 1 bit at a time with the electric telegraph. But then it took almost a century before the technocrats developed the computer, which throws the data out in kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes and terabytes. The question is, where will time take us from here?
So, wasn't it interesting? This definitely got me thinking that, my goodness, how did people really think so far? Their vision was so big and they were so determined to get things done. How could you even possibly think of creating lines, cables, all across two different continents and getting the entire project done and building such an incredible thing, a communications platform? I mean, I could have never thought about something. This was way before we heard of radio, let alone television, telephone, and all the other medium that we have today, and everything gets instantly. But even in that era, they made it a point that how can they get the important message across instantly during the World War. So from here, Laurie, I have a follow-up question. I'm extremely curious to understand that how was it working during the World War II? Can you share some incidences that helped shape your future career in the telecommunications area from here on?
Yes, in World War II, of course, the telegraph uh, was an important part of our communication, and we could not move from that area. It was a reserved occupation, and we had to stay in that area during the war years to handle all of those thousands of telegrams, and more importantly, the telegrams, the confidential telegrams from the Air Force and Army bases. But I only spent 7 years in the telegraph. I wanted to move further in this wonderful Postmaster General's department. I wanted to get into the wider field of telecommunication. I moved from Sydney when General MacArthur set up his South Pacific headquarters in Brisbane. I was sent to Brisbane to work in the telegraph area there. And then I was sent to the Army base at Cowra, New South Wales, and then to the RAAF station at Parkes, New South Wales. But when the war finished, met my wife, my future wife, courtship and marriage, and that was the important thing. Gave me the inspiration that I must move and advance further in the Postmaster General. And I studied with further training, further education, and I moved from the telegraph area to administration, and then from administration, district telephone manager, and various other management positions. And I had a career of 48 years with the same company, and retired in 1988 as the operations for South Australia and the Northern Territory. And that is the point in time when I used to visit Alice Springs at the centre of the old telegraph line, Adelaide, Alice Springs, Darwin, and the undersea cable across to the coast of London and up to the coast of England and up to London, and an undersea cable to Europe, an undersea telegraph cable to the United States and Canada. I moved in the general areas of where the original telegraph station of 1872, all of these buildings were in place, and the Northern Territory government asked if we could provide some of the early 1900s signalling equipment, the Morse signalling equipment for the telegraph office, and they had a museum there. And I having retired in 1988, formed the South Australia and Northern Territory Morse coding term and said to my colleagues, the Overland Telegraph is part of Australia's communications history. It was our first speedy communication link across the world, for there were no telephones and no radio. And we must, this station, a place where visitors from across Australia and overseas can visit, and for 10 days each year, let us fire up the telegraph office signalling equipment in Adelaide, Alice Springs, and Darwin, and invite the visitors to write an old-fashioned telegram, and we would then signal it by Morse code from Alice Springs to Adelaide, or from Alice Springs to Darwin, and likewise Adelaide and Darwin would signal messages to Alice Springs. We would then, the telegraphist would type the telegram on a special souvenir telegram form, and they would be then posted by snail mail to the addressees across Australia. So the visitors from Australia and overseas who visited those sites had a memento, a permanent memento of their visit, the Overland Telegraph Terminal.
Wow, Laurie, I think 48 glorious years in the career that you mentioned. What you've just mentioned about, creating that amazing memento of how the telegram, the Morse code system really works. I have been a witness to that myself. So I thoroughly remember the day I was at the open day at the SA Parliament when I saw you. We as spectators also got this opportunity where we actually got a certificate written down when we had given our name to one of the fellow Morse coder over there with Laurie, the fellow Morse coder. He was firing up the codes, as you've already know by now, the dots and the dashes, which makes each and every letter number. And he was firing up our name, each letter, and Laurie could listen to it on the sounder on the machine, and he could spell out each alphabet of our name, and there he could actually get our names right there just from hearing the Morse code. So that was happening live in front of us. So thank you so much, Laurie, for being on my first step ever. I do have a quick last question, but I like to kind of quickly, take our listeners through, summarize our journey over here with you from being that amazing young boy, looking at your parents, your family, your community, and learning, absorbing that very, very, very important factor that I believe will always be very timeless is to help a community and grow together. You learned that very, very important thing while growing up from your parents. And also the other most important thing is believing in yourself. Now, while you were in your teens, the moment you were introduced to this amazing profession of telegram and Morse coding, and you were so determined that you straight away got into that, you upgraded yourself, you learned that in within 6 months, and by no means is an easy task. I have given it a go at firing up those machine with dots and dash, and it takes a quite amount of a practice with your wrists, and it is not very easy. It is incredible to know that, Laurie, you were able to, fire up 30 words in a minute. I think that is incredible. So for anyone who's interested to kind of check more about that, please do on the internet, and you can actually read a lot more about Laurie and everything in more detail. From that to, continuing your journey during World War II, becoming that chief telegraph official in that particular Overland Telegraph office, giving out those, firing up those codes, which can actually transmit the most important information. And from there, moving on to your career, meeting your lovely wife, her giving you that motivation to, upgrading yourself and learning more, and you going back to studying and upgrading yourself is such a great lesson for everyone who's listening to us today. If they actually want to kind of restart their journey, or they want to do the second innings, it is a really good learning for us that if you really are interested in something, or you've just happened to realize I've always been into this particular industry or skill or profession, but I've never really tried that, this is a really good sign. As Laurie has shown us that you can upgrade yourself anytime in your life when you feel the need of it to be an expert. So Laurie, thank you so much, for taking us through your amazing journey. Now I do have a last question, which is a very simple one, but before that, since the first steps is the most hardest step for anyone in this world, for a goal that they have, or a dream that they have, or whatever they want to do in their life, the first step is the most hardest. So I want to quickly ask you one question. When you joined the telegraph industry at the age of 14, those 6 months when you were learning the Morse code, it took you some time to learn the skill. If you can tell us what was the most difficult part, or the most difficult thing for you to learn at that point in time, and how did you overcome that?
The most difficult time in learning the Morse code, I think, was recognizing that each letter of the alphabet had a combination of from 1 to 4 signals, and each numeral had a combination of 5 signals, short and long, and the punctuation, 6 signals. And some of them were exactly the same, or a combination of the letters E and T. It was a short signal and a long signal. And for the letter A, it was a short signal and a long signal. The letter C was a long, short, long, short, 4 signals. The letter N was, if you had two, N was long, short. But if you had a double N, it was long, short, long, short. So how could the signaller differentiate between C and double N, or A and the letters ET, which were exactly the same? It was signalling with perfect timing between each signal, each letter, and each word. That was the most difficult part, to have the correct rhythm, correct time. However, having mastered that, when you sat for the examination, you had to pass with 100% accuracy, because the motto of the telegraph, speed with accuracy. That was our motto. And in every telegraph office, in every post office and telegraph office across Australia, that notice was on the wall in the public area. The telegraph, speed with accuracy.
Laurence, this already sounds so complicated. Then you tell me that one needs to score 100% on this. Wow, you really have had, really been that determined. It is such a detail oriented, meticulous task which needs so much concentration and practice, practice, and practice. I have no doubt that you have given it your all, because even till date, you are so quick with actually firing up those codes on the machine, and you can also, you do remember each alphabet when someone does fire those codes. So this is incredible. And as I started this podcast by saying that this podcast is not just celebrating the 150th episode and not just celebrating you as the amazing Morse coder from the land down under, but we are also celebrating human spirit of being passionate and doing what you really believe in through you, through your lens, and through your journey today. Thank you so much for showing up for this podcast. And let me tell you to all my listeners today that this is the first time Laurie has agreed to be on a podcast and taken up this challenge. And I think he's aced it because he has taken us through his journey with such sheer love and in detail, which I am absolutely honored to have him and being able to, share his journey today. So, Laurie, as I always request my guest speakers to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that they really resonate with.
A quote, my favourite quote would be, God gave us one mouth and two ears. If he wanted us to talk more than he wanted us to listen, he would have given us one ear and two mouths.
Wow, that is incredible. You give it a bit and you leave a mystery for the viewers to understand what this really deep thought means. Thank you so much, Laurie, for being on my first step ever. Everyone, this is Laurence Wallace for you. I'm going to leave a link of Laurence in my show notes. He has given the keynote speeches and he has been there talking all about his journey and very passionately spreading his knowledge and experience about Morse code till date. I'm sure that you could learn a lot more from his previous interviews, articles, but I like to say thank you so much, Laurence Wallace, for being on my first step ever. I have genuinely been so inspired by your spirit that even till date that you keep going on and doing what you believe in. Thank you so much for being on my first step ever podcast.
Thank you, Ashan.
That was Laurence Wallace for you, my friend. And as I always say, start believing in yourself and keep believing in yourself. On the 150th episode of my first step ever, this is such a privilege to have someone who shows us the true human spirit, and to all of us that if you are determined and if you keep doing that one thing that you're really passionate about, everything will come your way. So until next time, keep doing what you love and always believe in yourself.